Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, the podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we got a couple of things to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic podcasts here on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And let's go ahead and get right into it. And hilariously enough, the last episode I recorded of 2025, one of the main topics of that podcast was me talking about who I believe should be the closer in the Orlando Magic's lineup when it comes to the last final possessions of a basketball game. And I said that I thought the guy that it would be Franz Wagner when he comes back fully healthy. And of course, right after I do that, in a game against the Indiana Pacers, it's Paolo Banchero who in the closing moments of the game hits a go-ahead basket to put the Orlando Magic up 112 to 110 and eventually win the game because Aaron Nesmith tried to do a go-ahead three with 3.1 seconds left and eventually missed. So, of course, Paolo Banchero knocks down a game-winning shot the day after I question whether or not he is the player I would trust with the ball in his hands in that kind of scenario for the Orlando Magic down the stretch. A couple of other things to touch on when it comes to this game. Paolo Banchero finished the game with 29, 10, and 4, 12 of 21. Love to see him be much more aggressive. Got to the free throw line 7 times. Definitely would like to see him to get to the line a little bit more as somebody who typically gets to the line closer to, 9 to 10 times a game. Would like to see more, but I like to at least see him be more aggressive in terms of hunting his shot. Desmond Bane finished the game with 18.7 rebounds and 6 assists. Wendell Carter Jr. was not as effective offensively as far as scoring is concerned, but he did grab 11 boards to lead all Orlando Magic players. Jalen Suggs and Anthony Black combined for 26, and Goga Batazde and Jamal Cain combined for 25 off the bench. This Orlando Magic team, man, just when you think that you know something about them, you find something else different about them, right? Like I said, of course, I questioned the offensive integrity of Paolo Banchero as a closing, offensive hub in, clutch moments. And the day after he does this, I also would say that this was one of those games where I do not feel like I really enjoyed the rebounding aspect of the Orlando Magic. Despite the fact that they won the rebounding battle 59 to 47, I genuinely felt like the thing that stood out to me more than anything was points in the paint. 70 points in the paint to 38. I did not love the overall rebounding. Again, only 8 offensive rebounds out of the 59 rebounds total grabbed. Would love to see them operate a little bit more on the offensive glass, but 70 points in the paint is amazing. And actually, that kind of brings me to something about the game against the Chicago Bulls that's coming up, where they are going to be finishing their last game of a 3-game road stint against the Bulls. And Jamal Mosley and Paul Banchero were asked about, like what the philosophy is kind of moving into this game. And it's like they're basically putting a huge emphasis on points in the paint. I believe the actual quote was, "That's our MO." And I'm so glad to hear the players speak to something that I have touched on so often throughout this season and even kind of dating back to before the season started, which is that this team is so much more dangerous when they get paint touches. And I think that this game against the Indiana Pacers was a great indication or a great springboarding point for this Orlando Magic team to truly realize that when you have taken such a talent hit by losing Jalen Suggs, you lose Franz Wagner, right? You have Tristan da Silva in and out of the lineup. You have to do it in a much more conventional way. And when I say conventional, I mean a way that is somewhat formulaic, right? It's no longer necessarily about winning the game based off of talent or being able to kind of outweigh another team simply off of the strength of we are, faster, stronger, bigger than you, right? Which is a lot of what Orlando tends to be able to do, especially when it comes to the defensive end. The more conventional route is, what are the things that help teams win basketball games in the most proficient way possible? Well, the best way to be a high level scoring team, despite taking significant hit as far as your talent is concerned, to your main primary scorers, again, Jalen Suggs and Franz Wagner. Franz Wagner was leading the team in scoring before he was injured. Jalen Suggs was a top, I believe, 3 or 4 scorer on the team before going down to injury as well, maybe fifth at worst. One way to become a more proficient scoring team is simply to get closer to the basket more consistently, especially if you are a bad 3-point shooting team, which this team struggled to shoot the three ball even before the injuries were concerned, right? So, the fact that there is a considerable amount of emphasis on getting to the rim, paint touches, and being aggressive as drivers, I think is going to be so important because it's going to empower Paolo. It's going to empower Desmond. It's going to empower Anthony Black to be more aggressive offensively as far as trying to seek out their shot, because the idea is to put their head down, get close to the rim, initiate contact, and focus on trying to get as close to the basket as humanly possible. And if you get the contact foul, you're getting two you're getting 2 free throws. And in some cases, maybe you get one because it's an and one. But I think understanding, look, let's go down the list. You're missing your top scorer. You're missing your best point of attack defender. You're a bad 3-point shooting team. Your best player operates best as a mid-range shooter, but really his best attribute is putting his head down, getting near the basket, drawing contact, and finishing through contact, right? That's Paolo Banchero's bread and butter. One of the best things Desmond Bane thrives at is his ability to get paint touches and either create step-back jumpers off of them, mid-range opportunities off of them, or kicking them out to other players to be able to, redrive or maybe even kick out 4 threes occasionally, right? Same thing could be said for someone like Anthony Black, who I think has become very proficient at putting his head down and being able to get to the basket and create contact. Actually, in this game, Anthony Black got to the free throw line. I call him 3 times. Same thing can be said for Wendell Carter Jr., who operates best underneath the basket. So what do you do to maximize the strength of the remaining players you have on the roster available to play? You maximize their strength by leaning into them, into drawing up opportunities and actions that allow them to get as close to the basket as humanly possible. So I love the fact that this is something that they're going to be emphasizing. Again, this is something that it sounds like they're going to be really pushing for moving forward, and specifically going into this the Chicago Bulls game, it sounds like something that they genuinely are going to start embracing. And I love that because I felt like it was already naturally one of their best skill sets was paint touches prior to the injuries. But now with the injuries piling up, you have to lean into the bread and butter of what makes your team at least as effective as humanly possible. Even if it's not the prettiest version, even if it's not the quote unquote most aesthetically pleasing, right? I think I think for a team like the Orlando Magic, where everything already is played and specifically on offense, I think I've said this before, the Magic offense always looks so difficult. It always looks so complicated. It always looks like there's always 2 guys guarding the ball at once because there's not enough ball movement. There's not enough action off ball. There's not enough happening to influence easy offense. And so one way to simplify things is to give guys the ball and allow them to create actions off of mismatches, off of rescreens, off of situations where they have a head of steam and they have to catch a defender backpedaling, where the whole goal is to get yourself as close to the low block as humanly possible and try to finish through contact as much as often as humanly possible. And again, they had 70 points in the paint, 20 points off turnovers. And the thing I would like to see a little bit more with this philosophy is the free throw margin. They had 28 free throws. Indiana got to the free throw line 32 times. So I would like to see Orlando lean into that even more of the playing through contact aspect. Next up, we are going to continue our trade wish list series, and today's episode's wish list player is going to be Daniel Gafford of the Dallas Mavericks. Daniel Gafford's name has picked up a lot of steam as a potential trade option for teams that are looking for a viable backup center who can be an energy guy, a big time rebounder, shot blocker, very good positionally under the block as somebody who can be your second line of defense or your last line of defense in other sequences, as a player that you can trust to always contest the ball when players drive. Excuse me. I think something that I would really like to see this Orlando Magic team do a lot more is be a lot more competitive against drivers. Something that I saw so often during that Indiana Pacers game, and it's crazy because it doesn't feel like it translated. Again, points in the paint, they only scored 38, so it doesn't feel like it translated very well. But I saw so many opportunities for the Indiana Pacers where it felt like they were just really easily getting to the basket. It felt like there were a lot of situations, especially in transition, where it felt like the Indiana Pacers were just able to get to the basket so often off of catching Orlando just not being diligent enough and vigilant enough, I think may be the better word, as far as like point of attack defense and stopping the ball. And one thing to kind of overcompensate for that sometimes is by having an elite level rim defender to kind of be on the back end to help cover those warts. And although I wouldn't say Daniel Gafford is elite, I would say he is definitely an above average rim defender that gives you something very special as a shot blocker that I don't think anybody else on the Magic really provides consistently. Again, and you have to use the word consistently because I think that someone like Jonathan Isaac, for example, could fit the bill for that, but I don't necessarily know if he can do it consistently night in and night out. Something else that I think would be really interesting about someone like Daniel Gafford is because I think you could probably trade like Jet Howard, Tyus Jones, and a second round pick and get Daniel Gafford for relatively cheap. You get a young player at the small forward position. You can also play the two in Jet Howard. You get a veteran point guard who can help with setting up Cooper Flagg, and he also can be a solid backup point guard behind Kyrie Irving and next to someone like D'Angelo Russell. And the second round pick can just be like draft capital overall for the Dallas Mavericks. For Daniel Gafford, we saw that he thrived best as a backup center in more of a platoon style. We saw that the most effective in that NBA Finals run for the Dallas Mavericks a few years ago with him and Derek Lively. And I think it could be a really interesting thing to have him in a two-man front court platoon with him and Wendell Carter Jr. As you know, Wendell Carter Jr. is maybe the more technically sound player, very similar to Derek Lively, more technically sound, maybe not as effective as a rim defender as Daniel Gafford, depends on, but I think that Wendell Carter Jr., similar to Derek Lively, is probably a better passer than Daniel Gafford. I would also say that as far as creating offense on ball, like for oneself in the low block, I think that Wendell Carter Jr. is a much more effective on-ball scorer than Daniel Gafford. But I think the things that Daniel Gafford brings that are very interesting is I think he has a very high motor. I think that he's much more likely to run the floor, and I think that can really help in transition. And I think another thing that really helps, especially offensively, is a real lob threat. I think that's something that the Dallas Mavericks desperately the Dallas Mavericks were able to really showcase from Daniel Gafford so much during his time frame there, was how effective of a rim roller he can be. And I think that's something that the Orlando Magic don't really truly have, that archetype of center, a true athletic big rim roller type. I don't think they have that player, because Wendell Carter Jr. is he's an above average athlete, but I wouldn't say that he's your rim roller type. He's just somebody that I think is very effective in the pick and roll as a roller, that when you give him the ball, he can take the ball off the pass and finish in traffic. But I think that Daniel Gafford is somebody who you can trust to, you can throw 3 or 4 lobs a game and he can walk into, anywhere between 8 to 10 points just strictly off of running the floor hard and catching lobs and finishing. Not to mention, again, I think that what he can be as a rim defender for this team could be really effective, and he can do it in 20 to 25 minute spurts on and off between him and Wendell Carter Jr. in a way that gives you this different flavor of center in shifts essentially. And I think that's something that I think is a really interesting way to go about it. It's not just the Dallas Mavericks who have experimented and been successful with the platoon center style. We've seen the Minnesota Timberwolves do very good with this, with the platoon center rotation of Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, and Karl Anthony Towns when they were all together. We've seen this with another team that I think is like relatively decent about it is the way the Boston Celtics kind of rotate their centers now. I think that's something else that's been kind of interesting, even with a team like San Antonio, between Victor Wembanyama and Luke Cornett, is the fact that you always have a high level rim defender on the court at all times. You have two guys that can practically walk into at least a block and a half average per night, and you have that for a full 48 minutes. I think that's a very effective thing. I think it should not be downplayed that although the center position, as far as the talent, that's not the cream of the crop, right? Once you get past the Jokic's, the Joel Embiid when he's healthy, Anthony Davis when he wants to play the five, like once you get past like the cream of the crop groups, the middle of the pack and the lower end centers, there tends to be this like real devaluing of their function within an offense and a defense. And the reality of the situation is that the center position is actually a very fluid one that is, especially on the defensive end, is I think still the most important position in basketball from a defensive perspective. And having real depth at that center position relative to some of the other positions on the floor, I think is super important. But more importantly, I think it's actually more effective to have two centers that give you a completely different like flow as far as what they bring to the table. Like for example, like Luke Cornett is like a rim defender only center. A lot of his dirty work is off the offensive and defensive glass, while Victor Wembanyama gives you so much more offensively as far as a package with being able to spread the floor, so on and so forth, right? All those different things. And I think Daniel Gafford and Wendell Carter Jr., they could be an interesting yin and yang where, again, Wendell is more of a technically sound performative center as opposed to Daniel Gafford, who wins with effort, energy, and just motor. And I think that could be something that also for a team that I mentioned a couple podcasts ago, like I think genuinely needs to find their hunger back. I think Daniel Gafford playing on a team with winning aspirations, not that the Mavericks don't have winning aspirations necessarily, but they're a team that, at any moment could be considered to be blowing the whole thing up. I think the Orlando Magic as a winning team that's looking for a spark plug could get that from somebody like Daniel Gafford, and it could be a really interesting fit defensively as well, because he's a very good roamer, and again he's very aggressive about contesting shots. And I think that's something that also could be really helpful for this Orlando Magic team. So you guys let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel about the idea of maybe like a Daniel Gafford acquisition. Again, I think something very simple as far as like a trade package is concerned would be like Jet Howard, Tyus Jones, and a second round pick. Or it would be like Jonathan Isaac. I don't love this, but like Jonathan Isaac, Jace Richardson, and a second. You'd have to use some kind of young player as a sweetener, essentially. But essentially, in either of those trades, Tyus Jones would be like the bigger salary within that. You're getting Jet Howard, who makes a little bit more money than Jace Richardson, I believe, but also the upside of knowing that he's an expiring contract also helps. And then you have a second round pick. Daniel Gafford is definitely not worth a first. No disrespect to him, but I wouldn't say he's a first round pick caliber talent as far as the trade market is concerned. So I think that a young player, a veteran player, and a second round pick would be more than sufficient. I think that Jonathan Isaac actually would make a little bit too much money to aggregate anything else with him outside of maybe a second round pick. That's why maybe a Tyus Jet Howard second round pick combo might be enough. But you guys let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel about that kind of trade idea. Last but not least, I don't really have a whole lot of analysis towards this one, and I don't want to alienate anybody with my own personal answer. So the way we're going to end the podcast is actually in the form of a question that was presented through an article from Orlando Magic Sports Illustrated page, and essentially the question or the main premise of the article and their main three Orlando Magic writers all responded through the article as part of like essentially a group project of an article that basically was deciding who do you believe is the most important player for the Orlando Magic in 2026. And let me lay out a couple of things that I think are worth considering or taking heed to when deciding your answer. Most important does not mean the most talented. Most important does not mean the most effective. Most important does not mean the most healthy. Most important means their presence on the floor paired with their individual development, paired with their impact on team success, makes them easily the most impactful player on the team. They don't have to have the best statistical stat line, right? They do not have to be the most likely player to make the all-star team. Your definition of most important can be simply based off of who you think has and will be the most effective over the course of 2026 in ways that are going to be conducive to building this team up to being a real perennial postseason contender. And again, I think the answer to that can be a million different things. I think as easily as the answer could be Paolo Banchero for the fact that he is the most talented player, and if he continues to develop and if he continues to develop as far as efficiency is concerned, his development as a more prolific scorer efficiency wise could really separate this team in a real way. But Franz Wagner and what he brings to the table can make him the most important because we see how effective the offense is when he is on the floor. Or Anthony Black and what he's been able to bring offensively and defensively with his portability within the lineup, being able to play the 1, the 2, and the 3 and guard multiple positions as well. And what he brings to the table can make him so important because he's been able to, really keep this Magic lineup afloat by constantly being able to rotate throughout the starting five and even come off the bench to be as effective as humanly possible in whatever role Jamal Mosley asks him to. Jalen Suggs as a point of attack defender could be the most impactful Magic player because as a point of attack defender with a high upside as a 3-point shooter, he's somebody that as their best point of attack defender is going to be very important when you start talking about having to play teams in the playoffs, when you're talking about having to guard guys like a Jalen Brunson, like a Jaylen Brown, like a Cade Cunningham, right? These are the guys that you're going to be looking at when you look at a Jalen Suggs and ask him, like, are you capable of being able to guard the best perimeter player on the opposing team? Of the guys that are going to be listed, Jalen Suggs, when healthy, is going to be the first one that gets a crack at being able to, really put pressure on these opposing guards. Even Desmond Bane, right, in terms of his importance, in terms of regaining his 3-point acumen that he once had with Memphis. If he can be a 37 to 38% 3-point shooter again, that can really move the needle for this Magic team. I list all of these different players again to not alienate you guys by giving you my answer. I'll maybe share my answer in the next podcast or two after I get a better understanding of where you guys may come from about it and a better understanding of where you guys' heads lean. But personally, I feel as though there are a lot of different ways to describe the phrase important. Important or valuable is not all surmised in just being the best or having the best stat line, performing the best. I think sometimes that can just be about straight impact. Just impact. Or how about this? Responsibility, right? Your responsibility may be very important, despite the fact that your overall, the counting stats may not reflect how impactful of a player you are on this Orlando Magic team, but the role that you play is so impactful that it makes up for the fact that the counting stats do not reflect. And that role, without that role, would hurt this Orlando Magic team significantly in terms of their ability to be successful, right? So there's a million different ways to judge the word important. So another question I have for you guys in the comment section is, who would you guys say is the most important player for the Orlando Magic in the year of 2026? I mean, I'm really intrigued to hear what you guys have to say about this one, because I feel like the answer can truly vary based on what you value. Do you value who performs the best? Do you value who is the most impactful player as far as being able to close games? Do you judge it based off of who's the most impactful player based off of the multitude of roles they're able to play, or the caliber of the role they're asked to play, right? What is your criteria as to what you define as what makes a player important? I'm intrigued to hear what you guys say about that, because I think honestly, learning about who you believe is the most important player, I think also helps in addressing what your most important position of need is as a team that may want to make a move on the margins at the trade deadline, right? If your most important player, if your most important player, or maybe your two most important players are at the forward position, maybe that goes to tell you that you need very significant depth at those forward positions, because if you lose those two guys, you're having to integrate guys into those roles that may not be as effective as your two stars at the forward position. If it's a point guard like Jalen Suggs, for example, you say he's the most important, maybe then the thing that's the most important for you to grab on the trade market, or in, um the buyout market to a lesser degree, which is a little bit harder for the Orlando Magic, but still would be somebody that you can rely on as a point of attack defender, a high level point of attack defender that you can have as a backup or play instead of Jalen Suggs when he's hurt. Right, those are the different things that can be really weighed out. So again, I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. Again, this has been with all that being said, with all that being said, again, interested to hear what you guys have to say as far as that question. This has been another edition of the Magic Ladies Podcast. Again, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that post notification bell so you'd always know when we're dropping new videos. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.